Hi, everyone. So, just to liven things up, I thought I'd talk about bots for fun rather than bots for enterprise or utility. And so, to give a little bit of context, our team has spent, almost the last decade coming out of social gaming. And so our background has been in interactive story-based games. We built top games on Facebook, on iOS, on Android. And over the course of that, we had to learn how to deliver interactive worlds that could live for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, with an infrastructure that could support creatives, artists, designers, writers, working on those titles, pushing content 3 times a week, right? And the strength of the games we made was entirely based on how compelling the storylines were and how memorable the characters were. And so about 9 months ago, we started working on SQL. And our challenge for SQL was, how do we take everything we know, which is around building memorable stories, building compelling characters, and kind of using that for this new medium? Because we do believe this is a new medium to connect to consumers for stuff that they care about. That is what they're already doing in messaging apps and on messaging platforms. They're talking to their families, they're talking to their friends. And there's certainly a space there and a room there to have perfect context about what they want and connect them to utilities or other things that are going to make their lives better. But the space that we wanted to explore was a space to connect them to characters and to stories and to the content that they cared about. And so to do that, we built SQL. And our desire for SQL was taking the lessons we knew from our own titles and implementing them into this platform. And that was, to build great creative content, you have to actually give the creatives direct access to the content, right? They need to be able to see the impact of their creative decisions, whether they're writers or designers or artists or UX designers or anyone else. And they need to be able to iterate that and see what the impact of their choices are, right? And then you have to support that with analytics and visibility. But you have to do that also without obviously giving up power, right? So with SQL, the goal has been, can we actually keep making something that's approachable, but keep building more power into it? The ability to have complex conversational branching, the ability to have natural language, the ability to use variables, the ability to integrate web services, all without giving up that creative visibility. Because with that creative visibility, we want to support people building personas, not bots, right? Like, that's what we really care about. Bots are not what people want to connect with, right? It's got a very techie, unapproachable, sort of Silicon Valley sort of label on it. My mom does not know what a bot is. Like, it literally took me ages to try and convey to her what we were trying to do. At the end, she was like, oh, so you're building fake people, right? I'm like, well, yes, ideally, right? Another way to think about it is that we really want to build artificial personalities, not artificial intelligence, right? Because that's what creators do all the time, right? You're trying to work within the constraints of what you have control over to give people an amazing experience, right? And so we are focused on building these personas that can actually connect to people, right? Now, how do they connect to people? Well, with humor, right? You can create beats that actually give people a chuckle, that make them laugh. And you do that in this medium, you do that with everything you have available. You use GIFs, you use images, you use emoji, you use cadence, right? Just even the cadence of how you say things and the delays that you insert, create these beats. And achieving comedic timing in this medium is just as much of an art as it would be in stand-up. Similarly, you can create drama, right? So we have a particular bot that was built where you're interacting with a homicide detective who's investigating a murder, right? And there's moments of drama. He discovers a dead body. He interviews a witness. He's giving you, photos of a crime scene. There's stuff that not only is dramatic as it unfolds, it's also dramatic as people wait for it. Because again, delays are part of the experience, right? You don't get everything right away. people tell you, or in this case, a detective tells you that they've gone away to do something. And while they're away, the theater of the mind is working on what is going to happen when they get back to you. The same way that it would if you had a real friend who happened to be a homicide detective investigating a murder, text messaging you crime scene photos, right? Not many of us have access to that, but that is a story that can be told in this medium in a way that can't really be told on any other. And then finally, romance. Right? So I'm not saying that we're going to build bots that people are going to fall in love with, but we have built bots that tell the story from the vantage point of someone who's either watching a romance develop or making choices as a romance develops. And you can have at least a chuckle, right? It gives you something that, that really can connect to people, right? But what is consistent using bots for all of these purposes is that the bots have to have personas. They have to have agency, right? They have an agenda of their own. They're not just there to reflect back to you what you put into it. They're independent entities, right? So, and designing that obviously takes systematic planning and execution on a very detailed level, making it just as complex to build a simple user experience here as it would be in a movie or any other medium, right? Like this takes real work. And so I thought I would also sort of start going through some of the kinds of creative content that we're seeing as both we and others use our platform to build some of these bots for entertainment and media. One is sort of your basic chatterbot, right? And this is a bot to chat with a personality, right? And it can be an inane personality, it can be an annoying personality, it can be an inspiring personality like Justin Bieber, right? But the job of the chatterbot is to reflect back to you what you put into it, right? So if all the bot types, there's a lot of charm that comes in this from unexpected responses. And we actually see users, doing the screenshots, posting them when something funny or unexpected or silly happens to them. But it's, for me at least, it's a curio value. Like it gives you a sense of moments that are fun, but it doesn't sustain interest over the long term until the bot itself has agency as well, right? Where it's not just reflecting what you're putting into it, but it has. That's when you can start building narratives. So narratives are what we are terming forward progression, interactive narratives with characters, right? So you're not going to fail. You're not going to get a do-over. It's an ongoing interaction with a character or series of characters that unfolds over time. And you make choices that shape the narrative that you may not be able to come back from. But the story of these characters unfolds the same way that the stories of your friends unfold if you were to go look back on the last year of chat history that you have with them in your favorite messaging platform, right? And that's distinct from what we're calling games, because with games, we explicitly want to model do-overs, right? So games are where you can make bad choices, suffer the consequences, and then have a chance to reset and try again, right? And so with games, you're obviously giving up some of the immersion that goes with really connecting with a character where you're like, okay, this is it. It's a continuous narrative. But you're able to make the choices even more meaningful, right? But actually killing a real bot after, working so hard to connect you emotionally to them just feels really rude versus actually giving people the ability now to suffer the consequences of choices they've made and then letting them rewind and try again. And then beyond that, there's also not just storytelling, but also interacting with generic media in creative ways as well, right? So there's news, which there's been a lot of news bots, right? Our argument would be that a news bot is not inherently as interesting or as appropriate to this medium as an Anderson Cooper bot, right? Because I don't really empathize or resonate with CNN when CNN sends me stuff. But if Anderson Cooper started sending me stuff, I'd be really freaking excited, right? And I'd really get into it, right? And similarly, if Anderson Cooper started sending me not just his view of the world, but allowed me to interact with entertaining content that shows that I'm an Anderson Cooper super fan groupie, that would be pretty exciting too. And now, when I can do that in a context where I can share that with my family and friends, once we have good hooks to share things with family and friends on the various messaging platforms, that becomes more and more interesting and more relevant, right? And so both quizzes and polls are sort of content types that are well suited to be, delivered in this medium, and that take, things that people are inherently interested in and allow them to interact with that content and make it, more meaningful and relevant in this form. And then finally, we're also now experimenting with bringing the same approach to web services. So this is a experimental bot we built, Chef Molly Flower Bot. And to build it, we initially called it the Punny Chef because she's just really into puns. And it's basically a Yumly API integration. Yumly is a recipe search company, right? And we basically are making it really easy to integrate with any web API and build a conversation utilizing that web API through the same creative interface that we've developed for storytelling and for media and for content, right? And you're not going to go to Chef Molly when you have 2 minutes, to make dinner and you need to find a recipe, right? Like, that's not the purpose, obviously, because she's highly inefficient and she keeps making these highly cheesy puns as she's giving you recipe ideas for what to have for dinner, right? But when you are looking for a moment on the subway, or you're looking to, just think about what's for dinner, but you want to get some funny ideas, she'll give you a laugh as she does something for you, right? And I'm not sure that the world is necessarily ready at scale for a punny chef, but I think that we could all think about how to deliver mundane services with grace, with charm, with humor. And that's something that I think this medium is really well suited for, in addition to, potentially programming the universe to know our every move before we even know it, and delivering the absolutely appropriate thing at the right time, right? So those are all the sort of prepared remarks I had, but I think I have a few minutes for questions, if people want to have questions or have comments.
Really intersecting with the way I think of bots. So coming out of games, what do you think about the issue of always making it clear that the bot is a character versus blending whether it's a real person in terms of the psychology of the user? What do you think about that issue?
So it's actually, it's real. Like, we have this homicide detective case, and it was a bot that was part of the Facebook platform launch. And we literally get at least 3 to 5 emails a week from people who are, emailing our helpline reporting crimes, right? They're like, hey, there's this lady on my block. She's not very nice. I think she sells drugs, right? And so we email her back and say, this is not the real police. Please dial 911 and report it. And on the one hand, it's like, what? Like, how do these people not get it? Like, before the story starts, like, welcome to a story, right? Like, this is a bot. Like, we've got it all up in capital letters and, trying to make it clear. But when people just get into it, they're just not familiar with this concept that all of a sudden, in a space that has been populated by real conversations with real people, there could be artificial personalities, right? And so, we're doing our best to obviously make that clear when people first start an experience. Like, initially, we were erring on the side of making it super seamless and immersive. We were like, hey, nothing we're going to do is going to take people out of the presumption that this is a real personality. Right? But we've actually now taken a step back, and before we engage with a detective, we are making it really clear that, hey, this is a simulated experience. It's not real. You can type stop to stop the police from talking to you at any time, right? Because we also have people who are like, why is the police talking to me? Why are you after me? What have I done? So we've tried to make that clear. But I also think that it's a little bit of consumer familiarity with this notion as well, and better merchandising, frankly, within the messenger context, to where people start to understand the distinction between real conversations and simulated conversations. Sure.
So I was just observing your presentation. One of the things that I was thinking about was when you mentioned the idea of a CNN bot, and then you mentioned the idea of an Anderson Cooper bot. That actually mirrors a lot of the interaction that you get on Twitter. Like one of the greatest appeals of Twitter is the idea that you can meet someone instantaneously. That I can talk to a person on about. I just tweet. And that's kind of really interesting because like on Twitter, you don't know whether it's their social media manager that's actually tweeting or the other celebrity itself. And in the same way, it kind of mirrors like how we talk to a bot or a person turns into a bot or a bot that's turns into a person.
I agree. I think there's two ways to think about it. One is that it's actually a facsimile of the celebrity's personality. Right? And one of the things I'm trying to think about is, okay, what is the relative value of a bot to do that rather than Twitter? Right? Because one thing I would take a step back on as a room is, and reflect on, is that every platform that's emerged over the last sort of 10 years, the killer app has emerged because it exploited something about that platform that was just not possible anywhere else. Right? Just replicating things that exist in other ways and doing it here just isn't going to work. It's not going to give us that killer breakthrough where people are like, aha, I get what this is for, right? But one is the simulation of the personality itself. The other is actually acknowledging that it's not the real personality, but being an effective mediator for them, right? I think that what bot conversations can enable that Twitter doesn't is at least the fantasy that it's a one-to-one communication, right? Because with Twitter, yes, you might get noticed and responded to directly when you're DMing someone, but by and large, everyone knows it's very much a performance, right? And there's something much more intimate about the same sets of interactions when they're taking place in your personal messaging inbox relative to when they're taking place on Twitter. And so, again, it's early days, so who knows? But our thesis is that there's actually something distinct that you can do in an emotional connection with another person that through a bot that you can't necessarily do on Twitter. I think I have time for one more. Sure.
So can you talk a little bit about, you guys are built, there's sort of two platform theses that we've sort of seen out here, right? We've seen developer tools, and we've seen maybe designer creative tools. Yet in your demo, there's variables, there's creation like that. Can you talk a little bit about if there is a handoff between the designer to the developer, if you're actually aiming to upscale a designer into sort of a pseudo-developer role?
Yeah. Sure.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So the question is, there's two types of tools that seem to be taking shape. One are developer tools that are explicitly directed to developers. Others are designer tools. Yet in our tool, we have things like variables and if-then branching and web services. How do we see it upsampling? At least philosophically, the way we've approached it is that when you first come on to the platform and you start using it to author a conversation, we need to get you up and running inside of 5 minutes and get that aha moment where you can author something meaningful, play it in the simulator, and then ideally publish it to a messaging platform, right? Now, from that point on, we are putting in the additional modules we need to build truly deep experiences, to enable things like complex branching, et cetera. But it's from the perspective of, hey, I'm still someone who learned how to do this, and there's a progressive layering that's taking place as I'm learning the tools, I'm unfolding and unpacking power features, right? And at some point, I might need to start talking to a developer so that my stuff can fit in with them, right? So, for example, in integrating a web service, we have a node where you can just plug it, call a web service and integrate in the various JSON that's coming back into variables, right? And if you're a tech-savvy non-engineer, you could probably do it, but you might be talking to an engineer to help you do it. You might even be talking to an engineer to build that web service. But ultimately, once that's done, and it comes time to really designing the experience, we don't want you to have to keep going back to that engineer to iterate, right? So I think iteration has to be engineering independent, even if there are some dependencies. That's at least philosophically how we're approaching it. I think I'm out of time, sadly. But thanks, everyone. I'll be around, obviously.